sometimes it takes time to start recording, and he's on camera. Oh, why do I say stuff like that when it's obvious? I'm sorry. But
stating the obvious is your job.
Yeah. So before we take questions, we're going to go through Jeff's fantastic channel, and I'm going to show it on screen. So people, there we go. So
I continue to astound people who haven't seen me in a while when they see my new face versus my old one.
It reminds me of some old plots where people have sort of plastic surgery and are completely different. Like in.
Well, I don't think I'm that different. I don't think it looks like I had plastic surgery, but you know, maybe.
So Jeff, what do you think the best way is to talk about your channel?
The best way to talk about my channel. With words.
Okay, what does your channel give people that they're gonna find it hard to find on other channels?
Okay. All right, so you see that tab where it says about?
Yes, here we go.
Yeah, click the about.
Yeah, and I'll zoom in.
And then you can read it with your wonderful voice.
I think yours is better than mine, but the doers, the experiencers, the artisans, the SP, sensing, perceiving, temperament, / personality type. We entertain, confound, and confuzzle. I like confuzzle, good comedy word choice. The world, and we have fun doing it. Jeff is an ESFP who does his best to explain all those wacky impulses we SPs all get and interacts with anybody who is willing to get into the arena with him, even me. So welcome aboard the roller coaster, and please let me know what you think.
Yeah, that people have been slacking on that last part recently. Not giving me as much feedback, but every once in a while I get something. I got somebody this week that said something about, that asked me something about what would an ESFP freak out look like, and I'm thinking, what are you talking about, man? But maybe I'll explore that.
And so these are the links that Jeff's got on his about page. So there you go, the Keirsey website, Keirsey.com, and then you'll be able to. And then Jeff's group, and it says the current content is not available right now. I don't know what's going on there. Anyway, wait a minute. They shouldn't show my contacts in the side there. Dear me. But there's anyway. Right.
Maybe the link is bad on there for some reason. For the Facebook one, I mean.
Yeah. Oh. It's a slight thing where they just changed a little thing in the URL, like one of few letters, and it's just messed it up. Because I remember having to change that.
Yeah, I'll have to go back and things like, because the last time I looked, last time I upload a video, because I always post the contact for Twitter and Facebook in video descriptions, and it still worked last I checked to go to the Facebook group, but.
So, what? Just ordered it by the oldest videos. Sort of.
Yeah, flashback 7 years ago.
So maybe the audience don't know. I mean, not seeing other videos. So how did you get into typology, Jeff?
Into typology or making videos about?
Well, I mean, first into typology and then videos, because it gives the audience some backstory on you.
Yeah, I haven't told this story a million times before, but I don't remember if, like, any time in my childhood or teenage years that anybody showed me anything or introduced me to concepts about personality types at all. I don't really remember, but I do know that the earliest time I really remember it was I was about 20 years old, and my mother bought the book Please Understand Me by David Keirsey, and she had me and my two brothers take the test from the book, the Keirsey temperament disorder. And it's kind of funny because she told us about it before we actually did it, but she specifically said she didn't want any of us to read the book before we took the test because she didn't want us to be biased about it. And of course, at some point after her saying this, she left the house, and I knew where the book was. So I started reading some of the book.
Did she say that on purpose so that you would read the book?
Probably not. It's possible, but I don't think so. I think she really did genuinely want us to do that before reading the book. So
She didn't take the book with her. So I think maybe
well, yeah.
a little bit of tactics there from your mother.
I mean, like I said, it's possible. I'm not going to say that it could never be, but I don't think so. I don't think it was like an experiment or anything, because if it was, then there was no payoff to it as far as her end of it.
Well, it might have been that she might have picked up. Well, she might have picked up the reverse psychology with not even knowing that you're like artisans, but she might have just picked it up as a general trend. And just thought, actually, I want them to look at this book, so I'll tell them not to look at it.
As far as I know, I was the only one of the three of us that did, but I don't know for sure. Not like I really talked to my brothers about it that much, but anyway, yeah. I decided that because she made the mistake of saying that she had a particular type she thought I probably was, and so I, of course, started reading the type descriptions, trying to figure out what she probably thought I was. And then when I actually took the test, I tried to give answers that I thought were not what she would expect. This is like I was trying to trick to screw it up on purpose. And the irony of that is, of course, that by doing that, I actually ended up scoring a type that was closer to what she thought I was than what I actually am. So, just goes to show that karma's real or whatever. Because the first result I got on the Keirsey temperament disorder was INXP.
Oh.
So a grand total of one of those letters is actually correct for my actual type. And that would be the P. Although it took me a while to figure out that I'm not an introvert, but so that was the last one to fall. But the X was the funniest one because I'm like so far to the F side, but the X was basically saying that I had 50-50 on T versus F. Anyway.
So when you've been taking it seriously, the test and like various tests, do you always get ESFP? I just wonder how much your results might change by mood, because some people out there say that their results change by mood.
Yeah, almost all. Like since I started taking it seriously, very rare exception, I either got ISFP or ESFP. There was one kind of weird test that was called like watchwords or something like that, where they did it a completely roundabout way, where it asks you to like think of random words and put them in boxes, and then compare what those words have to do with each other, and then write a word about that or something. It's kind of weird, I don't know why. Like my camera's doing this, where the closer I bring it to me, the further away it gets. I don't understand that. It like won't let me just
It-
straight on look at the camera.
It's weird kind of gaslighting, kind of advanced virus.
Anyway, and
Advanced
temporarily
virus.
turn that off because it's messing with me. But
Okay.
because I can't get past that. Anyway, people have seen what I look like. So
Okay. Yep.
So yeah, we did the tests, and like I said, I ended up whatever, and I read it says if you get an X to read the two types that could be the one, so it would be INTP and INFP. So I read those descriptions from the original Please Understand Me book. And even though my attitude at the time was not only to screw with my mom in terms of whatever result she was hoping for, but also my general feeling was not some egghead who wrote a book doesn't know anything about me. So I didn't put any stock in any of it to begin with.
How about, yeah, but was part of you like this? This egg doesn't know anything about me, but this does sound like my older brother. I don't know if that was
No, it
your.
really not. It really didn't at first. I didn't really. I wasn't thinking about anybody but myself. I was 20,
Oh, right.
and whatever hot chicks I was into. But the thing that I remember stuck out in the description of the INFP was, basically sort of this idea of how like misunderstood they were, and how unlike all the other types. And so I was, of course, that's what I was like. Yeah, that's true. I'm not like all those other people. I'm unique and all that stuff. And there was a couple of lines in there that I really did relate to and still do. Because there was something in there about having. I wish I could remember the way it was worded. It's been a while since I read it. I have to go back and find it. But it said something about having sort of a moral compass or like a virtue or something, but yet having an attraction to the profane or something. I don't know. It was something sort of a paradoxical thing it was saying, and I'm like, that part I relate to. But that's probably pretty common among people of many types to have sort of a. I mean, I guess Carl Jung kind of made that point, saying everybody had sort of a shadow type or whatever. So, I guess for some types it might work in reverse, like if their normal type is seen as sort of profane or whatever, that the flip side would be the opposite. But
Right.
so they would say they have a softer side or a more virtuous side or whatever. I don't know. Anyway, that's the funny thing is if I'd both known myself better and just been, more confident in myself and not really cared about trying to, mess with my mother or anything else, and had been more honest on that, it's possible that my mother would have understood me a little bit better at an earlier age, but I don't know that for sure. Because I did a whole video on my channel that you could show if you want, called ESFP Preferences versus Reality, and that one was I read that description of the ESFP from Please Understand Me, and compared it to my life in terms of how things actually played out. So,
Yeah, this is a brilliant video.
oh, he's so yeah. It's I liked doing that just because I think it sort of goes to that when I said not like the other people. I think the way that even though I know I'm skipping a lot here, but I eventually accepted that I could be categorized in this way. I guess, like I said, originally ISFP when I really took it seriously, and then eventually I realized I was an extrovert. But the acceptance of the category it is still my natural inclination to point out how I'm different than other people, to try to be unique in different ways. So having these kind of things as an opportunity to say, okay, yes, this does describe my preferences, but here's how it's played out in my life. So I'm not just a walking stereotype, um, for good and bad, for better or for worse. So that's true. Like there's some parts of the ESFP stereotype that I wish I was closer to. I wish I did have a ton of friends. It sounds like it'd be fun. I wish I was fighting off people every weekend who said they want to hang out with me somewhere and go out with me, and I had to. If my biggest problem was people saying that I forgot about, I was supposed to go hang out with them because I was busy hanging out with somebody else, like that would be a pretty good life. Yeah. So, that's not the case in my life. And that's not me saying that I want to like let people down or have people, feelings hurt because I like didn't show up to something, right? But that's not what I mean. But I just mean if that would, I'm still saying that would be a problem if I did that. But if that was my biggest problem, then I would think my life would be pretty good. And I'm not saying it's bad now. It's just it's not like ideal, but it's what I have adapted to and come to accept, and I try to find the positive in my life and not dwell on the negative. So, and your sound has gone out again, Ben. So, while Ben does his disappearing and reappearing act, I'll just say that Munster cheese is really good, as is Gouda. It's really tough for me to pick my favorite cheese because I love so many different kinds of cheese.
Great. On to choose. Right. I'll miss these people from the early days, such as Celebach.
Oh yeah, me too. Yeah, especially Amber Pneumoceptor,
Yeah.
who just like she didn't delete her channel, but she like made all her videos private back when YouTube and Google did their brilliant thing of deciding to, with absolutely no warning, change everybody's YouTube channel to their real first and last name.
That ridiculous. I mean,
And obviously, it didn't have the same effect on me that it did on her, but she's an NF, and NFs are like, that's like some personal trauma right there when you've just you've outed them. Even though I have a hard time believing that with, I don't know. I guess it's weird because it's like, to me now, I guess maybe YouTube has changed in the last several years in the sense that it's become so much more prominent in people. People think of it as being like there's actual like people who YouTube is like their life and career. There's like YouTube stars and things like that now,
yeah.
that didn't used to be the case. But at the time that she was doing those videos, it's possible that she really didn't think that anybody who she knew in her, offline life would ever see them and identify her as, with those. But it's hard for me to believe just from, being.
I think.
But I know from my own life that anybody that I sort of have to remind even the people I work with when I bring up the fact I have a YouTube channel. Like I don't think any of them actually ever really looked at it. So it's not something that's prominent in their life.
I think she did actually say that a relative had seen the channel and maybe been a little bit annoyed because they mentioned something private. Because she mentioned something private.
Yeah, that's like, I don't know. I don't remember all the details of that, but anyway, I basically begged her. I'm like, at least can you put back up the video that you did with me on your channel, or at least like make it available to me so I can download it? And she never responded, unfortunately, to that. So all that survives of it is the clip that Stellabach put on his channel, and then Ben put on his channel as well.
Yeah.
My wonderful joke about my preferences. And
Yeah.
That's the only piece that I have access to now.
It's there might be a 1% chance that I downloaded it. I'm not sure, but that would be.
Yeah, I'm pretty confident that I did not. That was before the days where I had, where I really started downloading a lot of videos. So, you know, um, I recently I was like, because it had been a long time since NF Geeks had done a video, and he's another NF. I didn't know whether his channel would suddenly disappear, so I downloaded a bunch of stuff off his channel. Obviously, I had to get the ones I was in first, but then I downloaded some other stuff too, just in case that it were to vanish into the void as well.
You did some good videos with him.
Yeah, I really thought those turned out pretty well.
The Tape and Faith, the Type and Faith video you did with him was good on your channel.
Yeah, that one I haven't watched in a long time. Of course, it's longer, obviously. So I watched the ones that we did together on his channel, but I haven't rewatched the Faith and Type videos. I have to be in like the right mood to be able to listen to it, because they get kind of heavy, and so it can bring me down.
What I liked about that one with Dr. Mike is that it showed a different side to him, and
I feel like kind of did that with several people that I talked to. Some more than others, but
especially with Amber. It was like,
yeah, I really, really enjoyed that one. And again, it's like I have to be in the right frame of mind to watch it, because we definitely brought up some like really much deeper stuff than again, the ESFP stereotype is prone to be discussing, but I think there was a lot of good things came out with it. And one of these days, when I get to it, who knows when, because I'm always doing something. But when it becomes the top of mind for me to like do some editing where I take out some of the best bits from some of those videos and like re-upload them as in shorter things to highlight certain things, and I think there's a lot of good material in some of those, but it'll take a while. So,
Jeff, did you ever record a part 2 to this one, or was this a tactic to keep people hanging on?
See, at the time, I didn't know. Yeah, I didn't know if I'd make more than one video, so I thought I was probably just gonna. The second video I ever did was going to be called Part 2 or whatever, but as it turned out, I decided to do the myth and truth thing next, and I could have changed the title, but I decided no, it still makes sense because it's just part 1 of the channel.
Okay.
So by default, the second video is part 2, even though it's not labeled that way.
It might be interesting if you do the follow-up and it's like 7 years later.
Yeah, and I did do that with that one that I have on there, the Great IE Debate. Even though I did 2 parts of that one originally, I did the Great IE Debate revisited many years later, just last year. So
this is why I get questions about my titles, because it's like, how do they know how many parts there are to it? So it's like 1 of 3, and
yeah, and that I actually appreciate when I'm when I'm downloading old TV shows and things like that off YouTube. I like the fact when somebody has multiple parts that they do say how many parts total it is, so that I know when it's the final part. It's helpful.
So
sometimes I can figure it out anyway, just based on that I know about how long the show is. But it's a little easier if it says that.
So in those 2 videos at the top there, SP, Myth and Truth, is there still stuff in that video that you've not heard anywhere else?
Probably. Because I know I talked about, there's a theme and a concept that comes up a lot. And it's weird because it's not something even the Jung theists are exempt from, because they always want to say, oh, Keirsey relies on stereotypes, but we look at these deep inner functions and stuff. But then they use the functions to stereotype just as much as
Oh
anybody
yeah.
else.
So I
And
mean,
one of the ways that's the case is you have people who will somehow act like an entire country is all the same type, basically, because
yeah,
they'll be able to say like this, oh, just, and this isn't necessarily the case, we'll say like Japan is very SI. There's this idea that somehow everybody in Japan you know is a guardian, an introverted guardian. It's like,
I mean,
obviously that's not true.
all they could say is, or to tone it down a bit, a major theme, in my opinion,
Yeah.
is
And when you go on that, then when you try to like stereotype entire countries or entire cultures, you think about like how many places in the world. I mean, it's so like I don't know what to say, like Western centric or whatever, because so much of the world in Asia, and especially in Africa and places like that, the culture is where a lot of the stuff that we say and do in America and Europe is considered like just crazy, just over the top, like some sort of wild, no moral standards, no you know ethics whatsoever. It's just a free for all and everything.
and
It's
yet
some
there's
sort of bizarre thing, and so people who from Europe and North America and stuff, who look at those cultures and stereotype them like all being the same. It's because they're not considering how the culture and the reality, the circumstances of those people's lives affects their temperament. So they still have. I really doubt that the percentages of temperament are that different in the other parts of the world. They're probably pretty similar. It's just the way that manifests in the culture and the behavior of those people is going to look very different to us,
yeah. So
because the standards are so
right.
different.
So from a cozy point of view, the predispositions are the same, but maybe the role enactment is different because of the culture.
Yeah,
That,
it's going to come out, very different in terms of, and what I talked about in those videos. One of the things I talked about was that in a culture where um people are afraid that they could be like arrested and tortured or something for expressing an opinion, that's outside of the norm, either, or it's outside of what the particular religion that's dominant, or the military dictator that's in charge, or whatever, speaking against the government. There's places where people are extremely afraid of doing that, and we don't realize in America, for instance, just how good we have it. We take that for granted, that people can express themselves. They can, they can bash the government and not get punished for it. And there's places where that's not the case, or at least they live in fear that will happen. Um, and so, in that type of culture, the instinct of the SP type to rebel against the structure and the boundaries and stuff is obviously not going to look the same as it does here, because if it did, then all those people would like be in prison or executed or something, if that was. So they have to find ways that would seem much more subtle to us to express that. And I remember a long time ago, when I was regularly going into chats on a thing called Ventrilo. um, Sometimes voice chat, sometimes just in text. But anyway, there was a regular in there that at least described herself as an ENTP, and it's funny because that was definitely one of those things where I had both sides of it, where there was part of me that was sort of attracted to her personality, and another part very off put. So for one thing, she was drunk all the time, and I'm not really a fan of drunk people in general, though they can sometimes be amusing. Um, but anyway, one of the things, it was like somehow the topic got brought up of college life and um, you know, parties and drinking and stuff like that, and I said that that I went to like a junior college, didn't really have much of a, there wasn't like dorms and that kind of thing, so didn't really have that kind of scene anyway. But that if I had gone to a university like that, that I would have gotten involved in plenty of school activities probably, but I would not have been like in a fraternity or something like that. I was trying to, saying that, things where the entire culture was based around drinking alcohol was not something I was interested in. And she said, that doesn't sound very SP of you. And I was like, that's because you don't understand what those things mean. If you're looking at this as a particular behavior, um, like that you're labeling that way, then you don't understand. Because we basically what we started talking about was anti-conformity, because I said, that SPs are non-conformists, and in fact, like we'll sometimes go out of our way to not do what other people are doing in order, because don't the more that people like hype something and say, oh, this is the thing to do, the less we have interest in it. And she said that if you are always doing that, then that's a form of conformity in itself, because you're sort of letting other people dictate your behavior, um, by like making this popular thing that then you reject that, so they're sort of controlling you in this way. And after sort of reading some more, I came to the conclusion the reason that she was looking at it that way as an NT is that part about how NTs value autonomy. And what she was really talking about was autonomy rather than conformity and nonconformity. Um, because I was saying, like, NTs want to not only not necessarily do things just because everybody else is doing it, but they don't want their actions to be in any way like dictated by somebody else. In that sense, they want it to be their own reason
Right.
comes to the, this is what I've concluded is the right thing to do, regardless of what anybody else uh, has said to me. Whether it was an authority on whatever it is or not. Like even the people that an NT may respect for their intelligence or their research or whatever, they can still say, well, they could still be flawed. So I still have to come to my own reasoning.
Yes. Thinking for
Whereas
themselves.
with SPs, even STPs, I think care less about that. It's like they may say, well, I want to be logical or reasoned in my decisions or whatever. Sometimes, especially ISTPs, I think will say that. But you can still sometimes get them to admit um, things like what I think you were referring to in a pretty recent video when you talked about my brother um, talking about when he was playing World of Warcraft and liking to get the reaction from people. Who was that masked stranger? you know, um, so there's still that yearning for impact that Keirsey talks about that isn't really as much present in the NTs. So again, it's a different thing, and that's been the cool thing to me is is coming to those kind of conclusions where I see everything in the Keirsey books play out in real life, where I see demonstrations of it. And that's the disconnect I have with the people that try to do all the typing by function stuff, because it seems like as fast as they possibly can, they detach from reality and start talking about theoretical models. And the more that you do that, the less, to me, it has any actual
Yeah.
relevance or way to help people in terms
No,
of
no.
communication or understanding.
I personally think with that, it's they have a dumbed down interpretation. Just like somebody could have a dumbed down. I think it's easier for somebody to have a dumbed down version of the functions than it is to have a dumbed down version of the temperaments, because they would more easily say that the temperament, well, there's got to be more to it than this, and then go to it and then look at it more in depth. But there's lots of people that don't look. They'll hear about Keirsey, but they'll never read the books, and so they just look at the
Yeah.
stereotypes.
Yeah, it's
of
just become
temperaments.
I don't know what the right word is, like just this sort of myth. Speaking of myth again, that in online typology communities, it's like trying to out deep each other or out new system each other. Like, oh,
Yeah.
my way of interpreting Jung and looking at the functions is superior to everybody else's. And so if you don't follow the P.O.L.R system, then you don't know what you're talking about. You're outdated. There's one particular prominent poster in typology groups that I encounter that likes to say things like that Keirsey's system is outdated, even though it doesn't make any sense, because I see examples of those things, like I said, in real life all the time. So you could say, I won't try to say it's invalid if somebody says, I don't personally have a use for it, because that's up to the individual. But to just make this blanket statement, this is outdated, is ridiculous, because it's obviously not for
Yeah.
people that have use for it. So, and
And,
for people that actually observe people's behavior, you can see those same motivations, the values and orientations that he talks about, like playing out in real life. And I talked about that in that video about the Guardian buzzwords, and
and they, no.
how
I mean,
much that those things actually have helped me. And it's true with NFs too. I haven't done that video yet, but I've had several NF types that have been important in my life, and learning a lot about what makes NFs tick has helped me communicate much better with them than I used to.
it's not. I mean, I think this guy is good, Vanderhoop. He disagrees with Jung. He will say when he disagrees with Jung, and so like people take the presuppositions as like you say from a Jung theist point, like these are the word of God. When he'll say things like everything to do with value has to do with feeling, and Vanderhoop's like, no, it's not. You can have that reaction with thought and with all the other
Yeah,
processes. And
if you look there at the top, the tab that says playlists, if you click on that,
yeah,
and then go to the one that says Type Tuesdays.
yep.
There you go. So I guess if you just do the view full playlist one, but that's what I was thinking of. But anyway,
There we go.
there's a couple of ones I already mentioned. The Great IE Debate Revisited and the Temperament Buzzwords. But if you scroll through that a little bit, oh well, actually, don't even scroll yet. Stay there. The one that says what the MBTI letters actually mean.
Yes.
Yeah. So part of the purpose of me doing that was related to what we were just talking about, in that Keirsey said that the mistake that Isabel Myers made was in sort of assuming that the MBTI revealed people's cognitive functions in a certain order when there's really no proof that it does that. It does what it actually does. If that I mean, that's was my point, is that if your test is something where it gives you a result that gives you 4 preferences, then what that has told you is 4 preferences, and
Yep.
anything else is an assumption.
Yeah.
And as I believe I said in the video, there are some fair assumptions you can make based on those results, but there's no actual concrete proof of anything beyond what the test actually is set up to do, which is to give you which of the 2 that you prefer in those 4 dichotomies.
Right.
And you have so many people in online type groups
Yeah.
that are like, people get hung up on the 4 dichotomies and don't realize it means all this other stuff. And like, the thing is all of that is the subjective speculation part.
Yeah.
Which, if that's your thing, hey, go nuts. I'm not saying you can't speculate and you can't examine those things if that's what you want to do. But what I really get annoyed by is people acting like you can't, that it's somehow you have nothing without that. It's somehow
Right. Yeah.
learning temperament or 4 preferences in the Myers-Briggs. Somehow this is like a limited thing, or that's like not enough to come to someone's type. But it's not true. Like,
no, it's the basis.
yeah,
Really.
right. It's much more effective for the overwhelming majority of people to simplify it rather than overcomplicate it.
I'll just say that the there's a guy out there that you don't like him, but you don't think he's very good with sensing types, at least. D.A. Dren, and he wrote some good articles on judging and perceiving for introverts, and about sort of so. For instance, INTP, we're organized on the inside. Our thoughts are organized, but not necessarily our lives as much.
Yeah, because he's another one of those people that is stuck in the model. If I recall correctly, I think he's an INTJ, and I think so. He doesn't want to deviate from the model says that this type is supposed to use these 4 functions. Therefore, I've got to find a use for each of those.
I think that
find something where I can say, theoretically, here's what this person would do because they're supposed to have this function in this place. And that to me is a completely backwards way to look at people.
I mean, I would deduct NT points and say, come up with your own model. Don't just think inside somebody else's box.
But unfortunately, most of the people that have come up with their own models are even worse.
Which
is my whole point. Like, there's no reason to. And I realize that NTs, again, it goes back to the... that's the funny thing about this, is that all the things that people do reinforce the temperaments, because Keirsey said, NTs are always thinking in terms of the system and how to improve the system.
Yeah.
So part of that is they look at Keirsey's system and say, how can I improve that? And some of that manifests in saying things like it's outdated or something, like, oh, there has to be this new thing, otherwise it's outdated. And there's a certain like disconnect, a certain like lack of accepting reality in that. But I understand where the motivation comes
from. I know you were saying that thing about people lining up the letters with the functions, but I can give you a sort of in between point of view on that. I just need to show something from Keirsey to sort of make my points. So, do you accept that, say, those that score T and J tend to be good at, say, supervising these kind of things, these kind of roles, monitoring and coordinating? So there is a relationship there between TJ and these things.
I mean, yeah.
And then we can say, so it's like, because that's more empirical, right? We can see that people with STJ tend to be good at monitoring, people with NTJ tend to be good at coordinating resources for long-term objectives. And then we can say, theoretically, so for example, mobilizing, we can say this is in alignment with the idea of TE, practical thinking, and intuition of time. And that's consistent with that. And you could say that maybe TE with SI is consistent with monitoring. But
I mean, you can say that. I just don't. I just don't spend much time with that because I
right,
don't find. Again, it goes back to what I said earlier.
yeah,
I'm not saying that in that those aspects are outdated or obsolete because I decide I don't have a personal use for
right,
them. I'm just saying that for me, for a while, I kind of thought, well, I sort of see that as a supplement to type,
right,
and I still do. But honestly, I keep feeling like any time spent on that is like wasted time because
yeah,
if you're trying to help people communicate with each other and understand each other, the more I mean, it's fine if people that feel like they're very well versed in the system want to sit around talking about that and kind of play out those aspects. But to me, if your goal at all is to improve communication between people that don't, you know, especially somebody who really hasn't heard anything about typology or at least very little, like,
yeah,
or is trying to find their own type, or is, to me, you're wasting time if you spend any time talking about those things because they're just going to add confusion and misunderstanding, which is
yeah.
the exact opposite of what we're trying to get.
I agree with you on that. However, sometimes you do say that functions filling certain holes in the
Yeah,
theory.
that's what I say. I think it's one of those things where it after I was solid in knowing my type and knowing a lot about other types, other temperaments, how to communicate with people. As all that played out, I started to see certain aspects of the differences in people, in individuals, where I would say, oh, maybe if I wanted to look for a theoretical reason why this difference played out the way it did, I could say this way was a way to describe it, and that, a difference between
Yeah,
introverted versus extroverted feeling. It's very it's still very abstract because when you're talking about it, and I saw a pretty good video talking about what that means in terms of talking about feeling in terms of directions, but obviously the general public, the overwhelming sensing majority
yeah,
doesn't see feelings as being directional. Like, that's not um, it's not going in and out, other than just, if it's being expressed verbally or visually on the outside, like you see that, but the way it's described by Jung, or the way people that are trying to follow him, it's in a way that most people don't. It's not just that they don't understand it; they just don't see things that way.
yeah,
So they can't wrap their head around that concept, and that's not, to me. It doesn't mean that those people are less intelligent in any way, or less um, thoughtful, or whatever you want to say. It's just not the way their brains view things. And
yeah.
so, yes, they can understand those concepts. They spend a great deal of time focused on doing that. But most of the time, I don't feel like there's a reason to.
Yeah, and
So
also,
it's sort of like, there was conversations. I remember being in a Chinese restaurant with my mother, and we were talking about the fact that I had a problem with her, like, sort of bad mouthing people that she knew in her life. And then when I said something about that, like her justifying it by saying, well, I wouldn't say that to their face. And I looked at it as my value system was more constant, where it's like, if I'm going to say something about somebody, then I would say it to their face, because I feel like I don't like two facedness. I feel like
yeah,
you stay consistent. And to me, it occurred to me that maybe that could be described as an introverted versus extroverted feeling difference, because the extroverted feeling type is more focused on the external effect of
Yeah.
expressing those feelings, as opposed to the internal consistency of keeping the same values for how you
Right.
treat people and how you perceive people, how you
Right.
talk about people, whether you're there or not. So there's an example of something where I was able to arrive at that conclusion through a whole lot of examples and sort of demonstration of these concepts, but that it's not the kind of thing that is surface level for most people. So I don't spend a lot of time talking about those things because I don't think it helps that many people.
Yeah, a lot of people can talk about people in typology as if they are a bag of functions and as if
Yeah.
there's only two kinds of thinking and feeling, which is not what actually Carl Jung wrote. People don't read the rest of the book.
Yeah, and
There's
that goes
more
back to
to
what you
Ti
said
and
earlier,
T.
is that the problem is you have all of these different interpretations, and it's kind of like, all the different translations of the Bible,
Yeah.
and you have to ask yourself after a while, well, if this translation of the Bible basically says exactly the opposite of this other translation, well, how can I possibly like live my life
Oh.
according to this thing if these can't even agree on what this thing is?
Oh, I
And
remember. Yeah.
that's something that has been translated and interpreted by billions of people by now,
Yeah.
probably,
Yeah.
definitely
Um,
several hundred million at least. And so when you have something like Carl Jung's work, which has certainly been read by plenty of people, but much fewer, and considered by much fewer people to have the magnitude that something like the Bible does, uh, to think that somehow you can have this 100% agreement as to what these things mean and that they just apply across the board to all people is kind of ridiculous when you think
yeah.
about it.
Yeah. Also, there's a few contradictions in Jung, where sometimes it's like he might have confused introversion with intuition.
And
And
and I believe, if I recall correctly, there's several times where he said himself that these are just sort of some things that I've supposed
yeah,
based on some things I've observed. I'm not in any way saying that
yeah,
these are like the be all and end all of human action.
yeah. And I will read those bits out to remind the audience. I've got the bit here. In the foregoing descriptions, I have no desire to give my readers the impression that such pure types occur at all. At, I give my oh, I'm going to say it again. In the foregoing descriptions, I have no desire to give my readers the impression that such pure types occur at all frequently in actual practice. There are, as it were, only Galtonesque family portraits which sum up. Now, in defense of, now from the other point of view, you could say that this is a lead into them talking about the auxiliary functions and going from 8 to 16 types. But here's the real deal, folks, about Carl Jung. And he actually writes in the preface to the Argentinian edition, the whole idea of the psychological types for him was to organize the material in therapy to see what the inferior function is, because it's the inferior function was related to certain psychological issues.
Yeah, and that's the thing, that I still see things today that get that wrong, where people will be like, "Oh, look at this great video I saw." Like I saw just the other day in the ESFP group, they said, "This is like the best ESFP video I've seen." And so before I even watched the video, I looked at the description. And the description has like factually incorrect things just in the description, because it says something about Carl Jung coming up with 16 archetypes, and he didn't. It was Myers-Briggs that had the 16 types. Carl Jung didn't say these are the 16 types.
Yeah,
So,
it may have been Van der Hoop who came up with the
well,
16
yeah,
types.
you can say originally, but what I'm saying is
Yeah.
that he didn't. He said, like, as far as a type, it was only the 8
Yeah,
because it was only by the so-called dominant function or whatever, primary function.
he did in the bits where
And even that,
he
like I
only wrote
said, he
about one
still
paragraph
kept
on
it
it.
to almost like it was an abstract description
Yeah,
of this type in theory, not this is the typical example of a person.
right.
So
So
even though
all
he
it,
personified it, but he didn't, it wasn't like, here's this person I know.
but
Like he spent more time talking about these 2 priests than he did almost anybody else.
well, I mean, what I'll say is his description of the introverted thinking type is pretty much just defining INTP, and his definition of TI is how INTP uses TI. All he wrote about the types at the level of 16 was when he talks about the auxiliary function. This is all it is. From the combinations well-known pictures arise, the practical intellect, for instance, paired with sensation, so ESTJ, the speculative intellect breaking through with intuition, so INTP, and then the next one, there's a couple of types which fit this. The artistic intuition, which selects and presents its images by means of feeling judgment. I think that could be either, say, maybe, we don't know which one that is. Artistic intuition could be INFJ, could be ENFP. Intuition with feeling, some kind of NF. But I mean, but he's put N first, so INFJ or ENFP, and then this one is probably INTJ, the philosophical intuition, which, in league with a vigorous intellect, translates its vision into the sphere of comprehensible thought. And he wrote a little bit about Nietzsche, but that's about it at the level of 16 types. It was only
Too many people that they will use the Myers-Briggs letters. They'll say, like, oh, okay, this other system that I've invented that supposedly is better at using Young's functions, but I'm going to use the Myers-Briggs letters, and I'm going to use elements of descriptions written by David Keirsey, but I'm going to turn around and say that Myers-Briggs and Keirsey are all terrible and outdated and stereotypical, but I'm going to use their stuff. And so I'm going to simultaneously be for them and against them.
yeah.
That doesn't make any sense. It's like, yes, use the elements that you think are right of different things. I'm not saying you have to be some cult follower that says, whatever this one person says is right and all of that. I'm not that way with Keirsey. I find myself defending him a lot just because of how often he's bashed for no reason online by people who don't know what they're talking about. But do I think everything that he ever wrote was correct? No. In fact, I have discussed at length with his son and others on the forum that they created many years ago. I talked about here's the things I think maybe could have been written better, or that I in my experience don't play out the way that he described them. And I've had discussions about what is outdated. I think is just the very specific descriptions he gives of certain behaviors, but again, those behaviors are examples.
Yes.
It's not these are intended to be the forever things. Obviously when you write a book that, when he first started writing, it was like the 60s or early 70s.
Yeah.
And obviously the things you say about society and people's behavior is not going to remain 100% the same as decades go by in terms of how it actually plays out in the specifics. But the motivations are the same. How that manifests itself is different. And it's funny because we talked about, when we talked about in the political arena, that there's a sort of stereotype of, guardians are conservative by nature,
Yeah.
traditional, and they must be all like right wing or something. That's obviously not true. It's like if the tradition in the area that a guardian comes from is of the left wing tradition or something else, then they're going to want to defend and protect that tradition.
And such as
And
a union household.
that's why I brought up somebody like Chris Matthews,
Yeah.
who's like an old school Catholic Democrat. And it's funny because he was back in the news like this past week because I don't care enough to watch his show these days to get his take on the current stuff. But I read something that said there were people who were wanting him to be fired because he made a comment that Bernie Sanders winning the Nevada caucus was like the Nazis' invasion of Normandy.
Yeah, invasion of France. Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
It's not a firing offence. It's just an odious comparison. There's that phrase, folks. People have done it before. An odious comparison.
Right. But
never compare the Nazis to anybody.
But the thing that struck me about that was because I had said before that I was kind of wondering what, again, as I say, a very Guardian left-winger like Chris Matthews thinks about what's become of his party, so to speak, in terms of just how loony they've gotten when it comes to what they express and what the presidential candidates are expressing. That it was kind of, I was like, okay, there he goes. That like now I'm seeing like, somebody who sees that who doesn't know type and saying, oh, what's happened to Chris Matthews? Did he, was he a fake Democrat? Like he's really, a Republican in disguise, or he's really, so these people would say, the people, especially Europeans, that will say America just has two right-wing parties because that's how they frame things. But they will say, oh, Chris Matthews, oh, he's establishment and so on. So that part's probably true. He probably gets, would be associated with an establishment. But it's a certain type of establishment that if those in power are not what his tradition is, he's just as anti-establishment as anybody else if it's not his establishment. So that's the thing, is that Bernie Sanders' success offends him for a different reason than somebody who's like, actually like an individualist, who doesn't want socialism to be.
Part of it is they are limousine liberals, and they realise that Bernie Sanders is the real deal in terms of redistribution, and so they are going to be.
And what I would say is I don't think that Matthews falls into that category. I wouldn't call him a limousine liberal, because what I'm saying is, he's sort of the opposite. He is kind of a working class champion type of guy who's happened to, yes, he has a talk show, he's made some money, so he's not exactly working class in terms of his personal income, but I've never doubted that his value system is still that way. He still sees himself that way.
Remember that Twilight Zone episode? Would he be happy paying a 95% tax rate?
I don't know. Although
there you go. When the rubber meets the road, then they'll be doing all they can to avoid that tax rate.
But he's not the type that's going to advocate for that. But what he would advocate for the attitude being, as Democrats, our goal is taking care of the working people. He would say those type of things. That's where he's coming from in terms of his attitude. But he's not on board with what he would view as like radical changes to the economy or to the social system, the family system. He believes that those things, the traditions of those things are correct, and there's no reason to mess with them.
Yeah, I mean, I can see that completely. I mean, and you can see SJs in union households. It's what is orthodox to them,
right,
in their sub-community.
So a lot of those type of people are currently very disillusioned with politics because they feel like they don't have a home anymore, because the Democrat Party has gone so out loony, and the Republican Party has now become so associated with Trump, someone who a lot of people have such a personal distaste for. Even though the funny thing is that Trump's, at least what he expresses on his economic policies, what he talks about, especially when he gets into like, the stuff about trade and things like that, he sounds more like one of those old school protectionist Democrat types.
Oh yeah, he is. I mean, he was
And
listed as a Democrat for most of his life. I know he was in New York State.
So that's the irony, is you have a lot, and that's what, ultimately part of why he was able to get elected the first time, because those people were like, okay, he may be an obnoxious jerk and not the kind of guy that I would want to take home to mom, but he still is closer to the actual things that I want to happen than this looniness I see coming out of the Democrat Party.
Yeah, I mean, I can. So I'll let the audience know that Jeff and we talked a lot during the 2016 primaries, and we both of them were like, Trump kept on getting under 40% in the primaries, and the non-Trump vote was split up between Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz and Rand Paul, and it was like, oh, if only there was one non-Trump candidate. And I've been listening to Peter Schiff since 2009. What Trump's narrative was in the primaries and in the general election was, the economy is rubbish. It's a whole big, ugly, fat bubble. And he spoke the truth to those people who were suffering. And his message was well targeted to those in the upper Midwest, in those swing states. And also, what happened was his message. Oh, damn it! I've lost my thread. So it was and so oh yes, that was it. All along, he was also selling a free lunch, making America great again, just on his ability to negotiate great deals.
Yeah,
No cuts in spending at all. Social Security is safe, and we'll even cut taxes.
Even more of an amazing accomplishment than Bill Clinton doing that, because Clinton came from a background where, he's from rural Arkansas, the poorer upbringing. He can say people could relate to that aspect the same way they kind of did with Jimmy Carter, where they thought, well, this guy, he kind of talks the talk, walks the walk kind of thing. He knows what he's talking about. When he says, I feel your pain, he knows what he's talking about because he actually has felt the pain. So for somebody like Trump, spent most of his life being a New York City business guy, it's even more impressive that he was able to convince a bunch of, rednecks and Midwest working class factory workers and people that he was one of them. But he was able to do it. And just like you said, by repeating those slogans and those ideas that, I'm the one who's looking out for the forgotten people, because these typical politicians that are talking to you are just spouting the same old lines.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you this other thing. And that's the thing is, yeah, it's amazing. I mean, there's never been a more, a bigger boondoggle in terms of convincing so many people that he's somehow one of them, despite very obviously not being.
I mean, but if we look at the actual number of votes for Trump was less than it was for Romney. And here's the weird thing. Romney actually won the votes of the independents. And Romney got less than McCain, and McCain got less than Bush Jr.
Yeah.
So the opposition was terrible from Hillary Clinton. And she is so corrupt. Really, and corrupt and her character is terrible. Like, she is on tape joking about getting a guy off who raped a young woman, and joking about that as a case. He probably did it.
There were a lot of factors, but the reason I even brought up any of that to begin with was just because I was pointing out to me that it was I had my own opinion sort of reinforced this week when I read that story about Chris Matthews, because I said, this is just showing you where, again, you see that temperament and type does not dictate party or political philosophy. You see each one of those other things affected by those values and orientations that somebody has inborn. So the circumstances are different, but you see how each of those types interprets those same things. And that's the funny thing, is because there have been so many successful SP Republicans that have usually gotten elected by making themselves sound more SJ.
Yes.
They have appealed directly to the more traditional aspects for quite a while now, and then to some extent that flipped, because that also used to be something that happened more with the Democrats, and the Republicans were more of the um, seen as progressive, quote unquote. That was a term that was used much more about Republicans, even as late as like the 50s and 60s.
Yeah, because they were about reforming the conventional. Now, even when Reagan when he ran for president in '76, it was a little bit too different. Like, he was talking about reforming Social Security and getting rid of it, and the SJs are not going to like that with the security. So, and he actually toned it down a bit when he ran in 1980.
I think we've got
A question, yes.
yeah,
A sort of a lead up to a question, anyway. So, Jeff, I saw a video where you talk about extroversion being simplified to something like, if you prefer people to alone time, you're an extrovert, and vice versa. But in other channels, like Eric Thor, you say that, I think for feeling types, it's like that. So forget that, and functions like T and NE don't necessarily need people. And it makes me wonder your and Ben's thoughts on this. And then someone says SE, for example, can extrovert in nature instead of with people, and NE with ideas, and TE with charts, etc. So what do you think about that, Jeff? The social component part of
yeah.
extroversion.
Okay. First of all, thank you for the question. That's a good question. Eric is an example of somebody that he's made up his own system that he says is based on Jung and stuff. And I'm like, again, knock yourself out if that's what you want to do. But as long as you don't turn around and claim the Myers-Briggs letters, which is he unfortunately does that. He does, because he knows that those things are known, so he's trying to get his version of it out there by sort of co-opting those terms. Which, again, I understand why people do that. I wish they wouldn't, but I can't stop them anyway. If someone is extroverted in a Myers-Briggs sense, what that says is that in general, they get their sort of energy or charge from interaction with people. It doesn't necessarily have to be in person. It can be online, like what we're doing right now, having a video chat. And you can see consistently, I think this is the number one sort of proof, if you want to call it that, of the concept of introversion extroversion existing in these terms, is when you watch these video chats, and what you see is over and over again, regardless of what is being discussed, the introverts in the chat will usually start out the chat seeming like they have more energy. And then as it goes on, they seem less energetic, more worn out and tired from the interaction. Whereas the extroverts usually is the opposite, is they come in and chat. Not always. I mean, there's some extroverts that are just, something else has got them jazzed up. They come in full bore. But a lot of times, especially I notice this in myself, is that I start out usually sounding more tired and kind of not really energetic at the beginning of something. And then as we get into the discussion, I get more into it. And by the time it ends, I'm the one who's like not wanting it to end, because I'm just getting to the point where I'm all excited about whatever it is. And obviously that can change if the topic becomes something that's boring to me or whatever. But then it's less of that I'm drained by it. It's just that I suddenly lose interest and I want to do something else. Because if it's not interesting to me, I'm not going to hang around and talk about it. And so that's the thing, is introverts are energized by topics that they're interested in, but they're still like physically drained by the interactions
Yeah.
with people. Doesn't mean they don't enjoy them. They can very much enjoy, but there's another physical aspect to it that can't be like completely shut off. That's going to that's another thing I said earlier. Earlier I mentioned Amber Numisep, where she talked about. She said if you're doing like talking about the thing that you most enjoy doing, or doing the activity you most enjoy doing, and you're an introvert, you still will be drained by the experience, no matter how much you enjoy it. And it's your favorite thing to do in the world, you reach a point where you have to detach from that. I forgot exactly how she put it, but and have to have the time alone to recharge, regardless of how much you enjoyed it. And it is the opposite for people that prefer
Oh,
extroversion.
it's a little bit different with me. If I really like the person, then I can go on for a hell of a long time, and it's not a case of the energy. It
Well,
depends on how much I like the person.
and you can see that in her as well, because she's a good example of that. Because I noticed in the videos when she was doing all those interaction videos, when she did the videos with the people that were closest to her type, because she's an INFJ, and I remember she did a video with an INFP, and it was the longest video out of all of them. It was like it was something ridiculous, like 4.5 hours, and it was because INFJ and an INFP that are like sort of in sync with each other in what they were discussing, and just triggering all of these like intuitive feelings in each other, whatever you want to call it. Like they could go so long because that physical aspect was held back so much longer, when like mentally they were kept on being stimulated by these concepts that were going back and forth between them. So I think that's the one of the best examples of something like that, where you see if it is in intuitives, if it's the subject that they're most interested in, is subjects that really inspire them or stimulate them, then I think they can talk longer, just because it's sort of like it's about that abstraction, the concept itself, more about than the physical interaction with the person. I think with sensing types, we're a little bit more bound. I don't know if bound is the right word, but a little bit more attached to the physical aspects. Whether SP or SJ, there's going to be those other things. And even mentally, it's going to be for an SJ who's in a video chat, it's going to be like those looming obligations and duties and things that they have in their life outside of that are like, oh, well, I have to get the following to-do list done today, so I can only allocate this amount of time to doing this chat. And that is just the case regardless of whether somebody is introverted or extroverted. But yeah, I would personally like to see those concepts sort of detached from each other, because I think as soon as you start trying to do this function is indicated by this, so this just means that the J in your type only means that this function is oriented this way. Like, there's no proof of any of that. I mean, somebody said that like decades ago, and then people are just like, oh, this is what this says, so I'm just going to perpetuate that. But there's no real proof of that.
Also, sorry to interrupt, but like when they say like externally directed, but ISTP is externally directed. So with some systems, somebody could say that ISTP is an extrovert because they're externally directed. No, they're a sensing type. So there is some confusion out there between introversion and intuition. But I once spoke to David Mark Keirsey, the son, and he talked about the ENTP can be very socially reserved, but he said that the ENTP was expressive in the way because he built businesses. And that's the Keirsey equivalent of extroverted. If he's externally expressive, And if you
Yeah, I
look at the
think
Keirsey roles, you've got expressive and reserved, and it correlates to extroversion, introversion.
and Head in the Clouds can correct me if I got this wrong, but um, I think that the answer to the original question is in the sense that it matters whether you're intuitive or sensing in terms of that. Yes, technically, extroverted people that are intuitives can get those sort of needs for extroversion met without as much physical one-on-one interaction with people. I believe that they do have ways to sort of meet those needs more seemingly internally. Like it's still external, but it's more. They can kind of get the I don't know how to describe it exactly. Sort of get the spark in their brain started, and then take it where it goes within their own internal framework easier. I believe it seems like that's what's been exhibited to me. Um, Hopefully that did answer your question. If it didn't, then you can let me know. But uh, again, it's like it's two different things, and so I think you're just again confusing people if you look at it. If you try to say, oh, it's just about the direction of a function, because what does that even really mean? Direction of a function. You can't see that. You know, it's just sort of speculating as to what might be occurring in someone's brain. So to me, it's again, I always try to say it's like I don't have anything against if somebody wants to spend their time talking about that or thinking about that, but it doesn't really have any importance to me because I don't see any application of it that really benefits anybody. So again, that's just my opinion. I don't try to hold myself up as my opinion is gospel or I want a bunch of cult followers to hold me
Right.
up as the leader or something. It'd be nice if I had a few followers, but
Yeah. So I'll say something about ENTJ and ENTP in terms of how they tend to extrovert. So socially extrovert anyway. So ENTJ, they're sort of doing it frequently. ENTJ's got a 3 in their tri-type. And if they're going to be social, it tends to be for social networking reasons to advance their career. But I'm sort of thinking about the two extroverts that are sort of least socially least gregarious, I suppose. And so ENTJ sort of focused on their career, but generally that's still going to involve people in social networking.
yeah, I can see that. The ENTJ that I know the best in real life is one of our managers at the restaurant company I work for, and his I mean, first of all, he gets some of that need met from his work because he works, sees customers and other employees every day, but also he is the dungeon master for a D&D group, so every time they meet and he interacts with those people, then he does that. So I mean, obviously he's just one example, but there's somebody who um, you know is an extrovert in Myers-Briggs sense, but how much he enjoys the interactions with people, you can see on his face. Like he's very much energized by what he sees as a good discussion with people. He likes
Right.
discussions and debates and talking about, and he's going to enjoy it more if as all intuitives tend to do, if it's more conceptual, if it's bringing up issues and theoretical concepts that he can discuss, then he's more stimulated by that. It doesn't mean he can't make small talk with people and talk about the weather and that sort of stuff. But he's not going to be as interested in that. He's kind of going to go through the motions. And I would say it's sort of like to draw I don't know if it'll be interesting comparison to anybody but me, but since I've been following a lot of groups having to do with diet and health and fitness and stuff like that in the last couple of years. That's been more what I've been into than typology. But I still, again, it's another area where I still see those type things come out. And one of the things is you have people talk about, for instance, low carb dieting that I've been involved with. is you have people using terms like clean and dirty
Yeah.
for those things. And it's like, from a factual level, if somebody says, okay, a low carb diet is keeping your carbs below, like, say, 50 grams of carbs per day. So you do that, uh, but it doesn't matter what you consume as long as you keep it below that number. So you can do that and be in ketosis and be losing weight, losing fat, whatever. But you could technically still be a lot less healthy than somebody who is doing the same thing but is actually consuming foods that have more nutrients, more vitamins and minerals, that give you more energy, make you feel better. Um, and that person can be exercising more, doing physical activities that help with cardiovascular health and all those kind of things. And so, and in fact, some of those things can have the person who might eat more carbohydrates uh, be in better health and even sometimes lose more weight than the person who's keeping them lower, because that person is doing the dirty version, so to speak.
Mhm.
So the comparison I'm making here is when it comes to those needs that for extroversion, for instance, for an intuitive extrovert, like an ENTJ, just to give an example, uh, you could sort of have dirty extroversion, which is like you're interacting with people to get that need met, but you're really not enjoying it that much. It's just sort of like, well, I need to be around people, so I'm sort of feeding myself, but it's sort of junk food. It's the junk food version of it.
Right.
Versus when you're having these really intellectually stimulating conversations with people where all these subjects that you really enjoy are getting brought up and you're really, really enjoying it. And then it's like the clean version. It's like it's the high
Right.
energy version of extroversion where you're really feeling like you're being fed and as opposed to just sort of sustaining yourself.
So what we could do, Jeff, is if I took a clip of you using that analogy, and I was to put it in type groups, type Jeff, they would probably type you as ENFP. Oh, he's using extroverted intuition with that comparison.
Well, and it's funny because Head in the Clouds brought up Eric Thor, and he posted this thing in one of the, I think, in Personality Enthusiasts, where he said, again, typing people by functions, and he had, or function pairs, and he had, this sort of, I guess, attempt to, like, here's how this practically plays out in these combos. And when I read those descriptions, the one that I most related to as being the thing that I most enjoy was about, like, meeting new people and hearing unique perspectives, which he described as being a combination of extroverted intuition and introverted feeling. So if you used that, then according to that, I would be an ENFP by those by those factors, or I guess more accurately, I would be an NEFI.
Um, what I will say is a lot of the MBTI people, if they're into Enneagram as well, they notice the limitations of MBTI and would be to say, but hang on a minute, because I would say if you told that to somebody who knew MBTI, they didn't know Keirsey, but they knew Enneagram, they could say, hang on a minute, sevens are interested in different perspectives and stuff. So that can apply to ESFP
Yeah,
as well.
and so what I said in response to that was, I was honest about, this is the one I relate to most, but I don't think that me being into meeting new people who present unique perspectives specifically indicates intuition, especially not on my part. It doesn't even on their part, really, because unique perspectives doesn't necessarily mean intuition. But even if you said that did, then me being interested in people who do that doesn't mean I'm one of those people. So
Yeah.
that's sort of the fallacy of thinking that anyone who's interested in a thing, it's because they themselves are like that. When in reality, you often have people attracted to the opposites of things that they express. It's not always people that are alike. And yeah, you mentioned the Enneagram. I was thinking about that earlier when I was saying, that the Jungian functions as sort of a supplement to point out differences, including differences among people of the same type. And Enneagram is another thing that can be used for that, where you say, here's what, and for instance, of course, my type ESFP, you have another ESFP that's a different Enneagram type, and they're going to act very differently on the surface than I might, because yes, they have the same values and orientations from a temperament standpoint, same preferences from a Myers-Briggs standpoint, but they have these other core fears, because that's really, I think, the area where the Enneagram touches on that the other ones kind of ignore, is the fear aspect,
Yeah.
which is important. And thus you can have a very different expression of that. And I've said before, daytime soap operas, because they have so much dialogue and so much characterization, regardless of whether you think the plots are silly, they have a lot of good character examples where you can see people of the same type with different enneagrams, and in terms of how their behavior plays out. And so because of that, it's funny, it was fun to me to look at characters on the show One Life to Live, because I could think of like 4 ESFP characters on that show, that 3 out of the 4 probably had different Enneagram types. And because when I looked at those aspects, I'm like, yeah, I can see, like, this one is an ESFP that's a type 3, this one is a type 7, this one's a type 2, and this one's probably a type, maybe a 4, and so it's really interesting to look at those differences if you want to get into it. But again, it's sort of like I hesitate to say next level, because it makes it sound like it's like some sort of intellectual flexing or something like that, which I don't like. But it's more like just sort of beyond the stuff that's actually for actually determining type. It's just sort of these sometimes interesting elements to talk about in characters and things like that. And you brought up the homicide characters. That was something, again, where I didn't understand that. There would have been a time where I would have said the opposite, and I did, because I related so much to Frank, that I sort of classified as both as being ISFPs, and turns out I was wrong about both of us. And the more that I paid attention, the more I realized, it's a very good example that Meldrick is, even if you looked at it from just the function standpoint, and you said, okay, you're looking for signs of the introverted feeling, like, you obviously see them from Frank, but Meldrick is the one that goes so far as to his personal crusade that he goes on, basically to bring down the Mahoney organization, and not even just in a way where he's trying to get revenge on them, but he's trying to end the conflict, because in his value system, he looks at it as, look, I may have taken this action and I was part of the death of this guy. He was a bad guy. I view him as this guy that we're better off without him, but here's sort of this havoc that's been wreaked because of that occurrence. And so meanwhile, I can step outside of the bounds of the law, because that's my SP standing, whereas I'm going to go against the authority, but I'm doing it for a value reason. It's not because I feel like messing with them. It's because I'm trying to actually bring about a positive outcome here. It's important enough to me to accomplish this. It's not just I'm playing around with them because I can.
Yeah, and it's a specific instance as well. It's not an abstract ethical thing.
And you see, and that's the consistency in his character. That was like, what, 6th season, I think, when that was happening. And you go 4 years back to the 2nd season, when they had the episode about the guy who had his son shoot him, basically the assisted suicide. And Meldrick says to Felton, "You go when it's your time to go. Anything else is homicide." I mean, that right there, I think most people would put in this category that we've got on our screen of the FI statement. He's expressing his internal value system in a very emphatic way. Whereas, again, with Frank, you get it, but you have the importance is lesser, because you have him saying things like, why he stayed as a homicide cop, why that was the thing he could do, was because of that rush he got from nailing a suspect in the box.
Yep. Yep.
So
And,
that the performance aspect and the
yep.
and the thrill of that experience was more important to me. He didn't say, "Oh, I had to do this because I had to put bad guys behind bars. I had, I had to, I wanted to be a cop because I just had to, you know, improve the neighborhood, or I had to bring down the. It wasn't about that. It was about his personal thrill he got from this. And the other aspect was sort of a side effect of that. So it was a complement to it, but it wasn't the primary reason.
Also, one of the things, there's some cultural things with Frank and Meldrick. Meldrick came from the community, and he spoke in, how shall I put this, African American vernacular English. And I think Jeff said that in real life, the actual actors sounded a bit more American than their standard. But he came from the community, whereas Frank was from New York, and he was very well educated. He was educated by Jesuits and knew Latin and Greek. And I got this sort of idea that he sort of operated in the higher echelons of the rich black society in Baltimore. And
Yeah,
and
they brought that out in the sixth season episodes about the snack food guy played by James Earl Jones.
Yep.
That Frank was sort of biased in taking his side because he was this successful black man that he viewed as being this pillar of the community. So he wanted to support that versus the thug element, you would say, of that he dealt with on a regular basis as a cop. So he had a natural bias in that direction. And that there was other episodes where specifically where Frank and Lewis were working together, where they talked about that aspect where, there was the one where the bullet had come from above and had killed somebody, and Frank assumed it came from the hood, basically. And Lewis was like, "Well, wait a minute. Why are you assuming it had to come from there?"
Yeah.
And
also,
so,
yeah.
Yeah, they had that conflict, and that was directly out of the book because the real cop that Pendleton was based on, there was sort of a detachment they talked about where the other cops thought he looked at him as thinking he was better than them.
Yeah.
And it was funny because in the first episode, they mentioned one of the lines directly out of the book. Felton says he thinks he's better than us because he listens to Emmylou Harris.
Jeff, do you want the certain Beatles song sort of come to mind?
No, you lost me. Which one are you talking about?
Hey Jude. This is a stupid joke. Right, but there's a comment from her.
Oh. Okay.
Big T, INFPT. Okay, an INFP that can use their brain. That exists. It doesn't preclude it.
I can't lie. I like big T's. I can't.
Oh gosh. Right. Okay.
Can't find any fault with that.
No. I'm only going 4 wing 5 4 7. Oh, that's the same tri-type archetype as me. That's 741. I talk about the Enneagram and some of my. Oh, it's here for a promo. I like while singing to Ghetto Dogs. What are Ghetto Dogs? Are these literally dogs in the ghetto, or is this an album of some kind? Or is this a group of some kind?
Find out on the Candor channel. See, that's going to be the thing, where here promoting my channel, and then it'll be this other person,
Right.
Everybody goes to that channel.
Jude, I think maybe you should make a contribution via super chat with this free advert for your channel. But this is an example of how this is the profile for INTP and Model G, and David Mark Keirsey really related to this profile. He said, perhaps
All right.
there's something to it.
I'll be right back, so I'll let you talk about that.
Okay.
I'll come back.
So we did a video about 4 or 5 hours long. I think it was 4 hours long with David Mark Keirsey. The Keirsey profile was based on him. He's really like INTP. And he doesn't like functions for complex systems theory reasons, because he thinks that functions are elemental reductionism. He's not quite as far in terms of wholes as his father. He's in between elementalism and wholes. But this, I think, is a good example of how the introversion extroversion thing works in INTP on the social plane. And so that's one of the things we can look at with the PIPS planes. I don't like calling them levels anymore. I like calling them planes because levels implies a hierarchy. Just like when Jeff said there's another level to typology that implies another level, a higher level of understanding with Enneagram. So this is using the ethics of relations aspect of FI. Again, too narrowly defined. There's lots of different aspects to FI. And when it actually comes to, and actually Victor does put it, he still calls it R for ethics of relations, but he then mentions ethics when he describes, to the back of Victor's book, 64, that was the original title and what I call it, but it's called Psychological Types because it's got better SEO on Amazon when people are searching for Carl Jung's book, and then they'll see Victor's book. And so he's got the functional states defined on the 4 PIPS planes. So FI described on the physiological level, the intellectual level, the psychological level, and the social level. So, but this is just in relations to, because I think you can determine ethics of relations via FE as well as FI. So, for example, someone can, so Seinfeld, it's all about the manners of things. What is the done thing in terms of social relationship? And someone can follow the manners, even if they're not going off what their personal feelings are about the relationship. So this is an example of the social extroversion, the social plane of avertness in INTP. It comes down to connection. Is the person worthy? I shouldn't have put it like that, but you know what I mean? It's like, because INTP wants to talk about what they're interested in. If the person is not interested, and sometimes I mean, I might do it where it's like, I'll try to get the person interested in what I'm interested in because I want to talk about what I'm interested in. Now, other people can see that as self-indulgence. And also what tends to happen with INTP is if they do find someone who's slightly interested in the topic, they overwhelm them. And it just becomes too much and they go too quickly because they're excited and the ideas are pinging across and it's just overwhelming the person. So yeah, strongly disapprove of the moles around it, but usually keeps opinion to itself. The reason why that's in is that FI and SI is the social mission block of ESI. Right, cold and distant with strangers. Over time, it begins to pick up the relationship nuances and finds the right approach to the person it's interested in. Right, because it's a gender neutral profile, so it's an it. Right, so that's one part of it. No pun intended. And then FE parts. Again, it comes down to connection. Does not like small talk. That's true. Keirsey wrote about it. NTs don't like the small talk. Not very good at small talk. Because, okay, let's talk about stuff we're not interested in. Irritated by uninvited guests. Can't make them feel at ease. Well, what do I talk to this person about? There we go. Can only keep a lively conversation if the topic is of personal concern to it. Can find an interest in, sometimes if they're on form and they have a sort of wide reference, if they have a ride, so it's like they're conversant on a topic. So advice at INTP is go buy a load of those introducing books on lots of different subjects, but I don't want to keep up with like pop culture and stuff just in order to be conversant on something. Can present any subject, not any subject. I should maybe put a note. I'll put it when I redo this profile. I'm going to put a note on that. Any's going a little bit too far. Unfriending a book with outsiders for his loved ones who create relaxed and festive atmosphere. So this is going to be a theme with everybody. This idea of interpersonal distance and closeness, but it's more of a theme with the introverts, especially the intuitive introverts, and especially I would say the INTs, because the INFs have a better diplomatic intelligence overall. So it also relates to Enneagram, social instinct, sexual instinct, and interaction style as well. So introversion, extroversion is tricky. Jeff is back to rescue me.
Yeah, so I'm gonna have to go pretty soon. So I guess I'll ask if there's anybody else watching that has a question to ask it now. If you have a question for me, so I can go ahead and answer that before I check out on this fine leap day. It's even still leap day where Ben is, I believe. So for a little bit longer.
And I'll just say to the audience that part of the reason for doing this event was thinking I'd have some loads of super chats, and I've not had one yet. So come on, somebody, pony up with care.
Well, you had to do had to be like those Jays and be more and prepare in advance with the promotion. To
we've had very good stuff from you, Jeff. It's been a pleasure to host you. We have some other things maybe on your channel whilst we're waiting for questions, folks. There's 6 people watching. Please type away. Whilst we're doing, I'll go back to showing Jeff's channel, because those people probably joined recently have not seen Jeff's channel.
Well, I'm scrolling back to see that at some point Fate Wind said, what type is CM? Maybe you're talking about Chris Matthews when CM? I'm just guessing.
Probably.
Yeah, I would guess probably an ESFJ would be my guess for Chris Matthews, but could be.
Is he warm enough? Is he warm enough?
Could be a thinker. He's kind of like I said. So the SJ, I'm pretty solid on. He seems very much a guardian in temperament, but the other two are a little bit closer to the middle.
Yeah, I don't see him as warm. I don't see him as warm enough for ESFJ.
But I mean, he could be when he's not, doing a show. That's the thing is that the show is he's got a very much sort of a character, that he does for the show where he doesn't want to step outside of that. I think Sean Hannity is an example of, on the other side of political spectrum, but a similar type of presentation. He's very much stick to the repetition of the theme.
Oh, yeah. STJ, a kind of thing I get with him. Sean Hannity.
So Matthews might be STJ too. I don't know. Anyway, and she said, I'd like to know if Trump would be considered a healthy or unhealthy ESTP. I could go on a long rant about that, but I'm going to make a short answer and say I don't like sort of amateur diagnoses of health of people. Where they just assess someone as an unhealthy whatever. I've never liked that. Even in type groups, I've objected to people doing that because it's like everything is relative in that sense. You can't really black and white say, well, this is a healthy person, this is unhealthy. I mean, yeah, you can see, somebody looks fit and, like they breathe better versus somebody who's like a meth head, and you can kind of be like, okay, I think this person is healthier. Yeah, there's some objective observations you can make from a physical or a mental standpoint, but I still think that I don't like to make those assessments. So I wouldn't say, when it comes to the health of Donald Trump as an ESTP, I would say I'm not really qualified to assess that. I would say there are ESTPs who come off as if they are considerate,
Yeah.
more polished in some ways.
You also said you saw no compassion in Trump.
Well, I don't know if I see no compassion, but it's certainly
Little.
not a top element of his
Yeah.
presentation. I would say he seems very motivated by his own interests and, his own sort of spontaneous desires for whatever it is that, occurs to him to be the thing to go after right now, which is why he has dubbed himself being this great deal maker and negotiator, because he's very much the illustration of Keirsey talking about that type that everything's on the table and everything's negotiable kind of attitude.
Yeah, so I did this video with Jonathan. Now, Jonathan has studied the DSM, and we went through a proper the actual diagnosis scale, and we concluded that Trump is on the scale but doesn't qualify as a psychopath. And we were sort of like discussing him on each question.
Head in the clouds has completely lost me with this.
Right, let's have a look.
With this stuff.
Right, okay, so
I don't know if that was intended for me or for Ben, because I don't know what that means. So
yeah, it's not. It cannot even do so. Right, okay. That is one of the things which is wrong about TI. There are loads of accomplished ESFPs and ENFPs who run their own business. It is a mistake to put all reasoning ability in, like, say, TI. Like, say, oh, everything to do with logic is TI. It's just that people who are good at TI tend to rely on the process of logic, and it tends to train up. There's a load of people who've got very good reasoning and weak TI. So, for example, Dr. Julia is a neuroscientist. She resembles ESFJ. Theoretically, she has inferior TI. She's got very good reasoning ability, but there's a difference between reasoning ability and then TI as defined by Carl Jung, which is subjective thinking. So we mustn't equate logic and sort of logical IQ stuff just with TI. It's just that those people with TI tend to be good at those things. It's just like people with ESFP preferences tend to be good at acting because they naturally practice those things that they're predisposed to. So
yeah, as far as the contradicting yourself within the same sentence thing, that to me is an SP expression. Basically, he's like the epitome of that, in the sense that I'm going to express what is in my head to express right this second, even if earlier in the sentence was 10 seconds ago and I felt a different way.
yeah, also it
can switch that fast. So honestly, to me, as I understand TI, that's a sign more that he's that way. The fact that he would do that, because a TE type would be much more likely to finish the sentence in a consistent way, and then if they reevaluated something, go back and change it later, as opposed to changing that quickly because this is what occurs to me now.
What I'll say about Jeff with TI is what's associated with TI is like internal consistency. Jeff is good at pointing out holes in my generalizations, so I can say he can use it in an unvalued way of seeing holes in people's arguments rather than using TI to create a theory. Would you say that's fair, Jeff, that you can find holes in people's arguments?
I mean, yeah, and I think because I stay very specific. It's like if somebody says, my cat has a long tail, my response to that might be about the length of the tail. Like, well, it doesn't seem that long compared to this other cat I know, or whatever. So it's taking the specific thing that's been expressed and responding with another specific example that occurs to me, as opposed to taking that thing about my cat has a long tail to some other place that has nothing to do with cats or tails. Which in what I've seen so often is I'll respond about that specific thing, and then that person will extrapolate a bunch of things that I just said nothing about. And I'm
Yeah,
like, no, I was being very specific.
because a lot of times I will throw things out there as a generalization just to see what people think of it, because sometimes they work, and I don't mind if half the time they don't. It's just to and see what
Yeah.
people's responses
Whereas
are.
I try to avoid. You talk about contradicting yourself in the same sentence, but honestly, like for me,
No.
I don't think I do that very often. But I think what I do is by the end of the sentence, if I've expressed something that I think is too general, I'm automatically wanting to sort of correct myself and point out point out a counter example of what I just said. You know, sort of almost like I'm arguing with myself, because if I think I was too general, I'm trying to get it more specific, and I'm trying to say, well, that doesn't apply to this other thing, because I'm always thinking of the counter examples and the
Right.
anomalies, the exceptions to rules, as opposed to trying to find a way to get everybody as a group or a category. I'm trying to make them back into an individual again. I'm trying
Right.
to
So,
always trying to find the individual aspects of the specific aspects.
so I'll let the folks know I did 8 videos with Jeff going through this profile. I think here number 4 would rather do something tangible than study abstract theories, and number 3 very much applies to Jeff as well. Talk to people rather than get it from manuals.
Absolutely. And the tangible thing that I'm going to do now is I'm going to get some food. But I
Okay.
appreciate the invitation, and thanks for those that watched. And do check out my channel, the SP Spaz. More videos to come in the future, and the more feedback, the better. So if you let me know what you want me to talk about and do videos on, the more likely I am to actually do them. So feel free to communicate with me.
Okay. So, audience. Yeah. So, whilst I have 6 viewers, feel free to ask questions, typological questions in the side.
Oh, okay. So Ben's going to keep this going for his own
Yeah,
questions, and well,
yeah.
I may or may not check back later. Then I'll see how I
Okay,
feel after I get some food. But
yeah. If it,
so,
depends how quickly I get
but for
questions.
now anyway, it's goodbye from me.
Yes. Goodbye, Jeff.
Bye.
Right. So the plan was to talk for about half an hour, then get loads of questions and super chats. So even if there aren't any super chats, are there any more questions? Oh, here we go. I've been wondering about the TI for a long time. A split time TI break. Thank you for clearing it up for me. So head in the clouds. Do you relate to ENFP? Because there's a difference between the TI breaks as considered between ESFP and ENFP. I'm going to try and do something fancy. If I open that with if I put that next, if I open that with Gwenview, and then I try and open up another file. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go between the 2 TI breaks. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy that, just put it in a new folder. I'll just go to, say, event prep. Just right. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the 2 profiles next to each other. So looking for, so these are all the ESF. We're going to put ESFP in there. Cancel that one. ESFP and NFs. There's ENFP. Right. Copy. And I'll show it in a moment, and then we compare the two. Right, I think that's enough, and then I'll put it on screen. Oh, I'll go to the next one. So how have I arranged this? Ah, right. Oh, roll. So that's the ENFP. Right, ENFP is TI. So Victor has ENFP is really weak at TI plus. I know it's got TI minus there, but it's really weak at the other side of it. So, for example, with INTJ knit, he has FE minus in this block. And so what they're really bad at is FE plus, really bad at showing positive emotionality. That's more which ESFJ is an exemplar of. So this kind of TI, the way this is defined, it reads like MBTI, Keirsey, Behrens, Nardi, ISTJ. So this kind of thing with discipline, I suppose, you can see that in younger ones. But Megan Lavota made the good point that feeling types have to go to school. So they develop their thinking function. Whereas they're not really doing a lot of feeling stuff in school. So the social field is going to affect functional development, going to affect more functions than others. I mean, there might be certain societies which value extroverted sensor more, say a more tribal society. Or you could think for, say, Julia's upbringing with her sort of ENTJ father, and what would be normal in her upbringing. So it's tricky. Okay, so Ti Brake in ENFP, in my opinion. When they're younger, there is a tendency for them to go with their heart rather than their head, and to go with sort of utopian outcomes and not sort of think things through. So, for example, if you were to ask someone, if you were to ask an ENFP this question, they wouldn't want to think it through. So if you were to ask them, what would happen if the minimum wage was $50 an hour? And they don't want to, and they wouldn't want to reason through what all of the consequences would be for, say, those people who were not worth paying $50 an hour because they didn't provide that value to their employer. So the reason why they don't want to think like this is because it goes against other values of, say, fairness. Now, but another person might say fairness is meritocracy. Somebody else might say fairness is egalitarianism. And so it's not wanting to, because they can think, and when you've not got a tension between the ethical and the pragmatic, then their thinking is not going to be compromised by their utopian ideals. When it comes to systems that for some reason get classified as TI, but the person who creates the system, it's their TI, in that if it's a system built on subjective premises, and the way it plays out, and it's all logically consistent, then it's like, oh, perhaps there's something to these premises because it's not ended up in a reductio ad absurdum. It's worked out into a structure, and it's internally consistent, and it works in the real world, but it's based on these subjective premises. The person that's come up with that, that's their TI. But when you read that in a book, that's not TI to you. That's TI. That's TE. That's somebody else's thinking. If somebody comes up with a theory and that theory becomes generally accepted, that's TE. That's empirical. That's empirical thinking. The consensus thinking. That's not TI. TI is subjective thinking. And when you use this definition of subjective thinking, you can then look at NTPs and STPs and see, yes, they do. They think for themselves. It's that because NTPs are going from premises, they use logic, formal logic, to sort of like, and so Jung separated it out from the laws of reason. He didn't include the laws of reason in TI and TE. And he said with feeling types, the laws of reason are not necessarily deflected, but it starts with the subjective premise. And the whole argument has this sort of subjective feel to it based on its premises. Now, sometimes ENTP can get to a point where they can see so many options where it's consistent, and they can get into the credible bullshit thing. So understanding TI. So, another thing might be the way ENFPs and ESFPs are. They have to concentrate on the structure in order to learn it. And you've got that lack of attention there. But I actually think in terms of abstractions, ENFP is better at learning an abstract system than ENFP because they are abstract. And also, thinking is involved with NE. And Van der Hoop said, and he contradicted Jung, he said, hang on a minute, perception is cognitive, which is why perception is included in cognitive psychology books. Perception is a cognitive process. So, and you can get, what was it? Yes, Cognitive Psychology for Dummies, written by two proper cognitive psychologists. I actually tried to get one of them to join the event with Dario. No email reply. Mind you, I did go to the wrong one. I should have gone to the one for the media event. So here we go. We've got. I'm just going to go through these final two questions, these comments. ENFP, what I thought would have to follow in Eric's. The problem with Eric's definitions is they are very subjective. Now that is an example of TI. What Eric does, he has subjective premises, and he has them all internally consistent, and he sees those premises as internally consistent. So it's not that TI is structural logic, is that TI tends to use structural logic because it's based on premises and there's nothing else. So it's, how does this then play out? If we go with this premise, let's deduct from that and see where we end up. And if we end up in a place that's a nice model and it works in reality and it works internally, then it's a theory that's got some validity to it. Right. Following. Right. But again, functions develop, and Carl Jung wrote that functions develop. The ones that develop least, in my opinion, is FI Brake. I can see it. I can see an FI Brake person developing in a way where it's like, okay, I don't think this is offensive, but I've learned that these people find this thing offensive, and they sort of learned from the meaning of the communication is the response that you get. So they sort of doing the same process. So if you see their behavior, it's like, oh, they don't see FI Brake, but it's like they're probably using FE to get to the same place just through experience. Because they do see, especially ENTP, will play devil's advocate, and sometimes not just to troll, but to actually show different viewpoints. So there might be that thing of what was that thing where you push something off a bridge to kill 2 people, and if you didn't do it, more people would get killed. Is it right to kill 2 people in order to prevent 10 people from being killed? And the different viewpoints on that situation. And that's a better one than the, oh, do you rob the corner shop to get the drug? Because there's all other things you could do. But then the question is, are you the right person in that position to play God and to like kill those people to save others? For ESTP, they'll make a quicker decision, and it's like do the right thing that they see in the moment, the tactical objective, and worry about the moral niceties later on. FE can be developed as a function because you've got these sort of like societal aspects to it. Reading body language, manners, the mores. FI, it could be. But say, look at it. Douglas Adams, did he get better at characterization? It's possible. Different facets of FI possibly develop because the brain does change. But I think that's the hardest one to develop. You can get, here's an example, Tamara. Really very much like INFJ. Super NI and NF. She has the highest NFWPM. NF words per minute of anyone I know. Her father, though, ENTJ. And so from a very young age, she was like given a lot of TE business logic kind of stuff of how to be entrepreneurial. So her development is gone in that way. So then you got a case of what is it like in practice? You've got this business logic, but if it's in an NFE kind of business, then you're doing the TE stuff for NF reasons. So that's going to be more developed because society values TE so much. So it also depends if there's workarounds for various functions. So there's an FE workaround for FI. There's not really a workaround for TE. Any break can be weird in that somebody can still be very creative and say ISFP, but it's coming at it from a different process. And their art is probably more integrated and coming from a place of inspiration and NI, rather than because any creativity can go all wrong and be all over the place, not integrated. Songs that go lots of different areas and there's not an integrated theme, there's not prosody. So here we go. I'm okay at reasoning. My partner INTJ disagrees. Well, they disagree about everything. Right. So when I refer to others' theories, I can explain myself fine. But when I create my own theories, I might struggle to make sense in a TI way, but not in an FI way, for example. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Yeah, so FPs, those that resemble FI ego types, FI max types, they tend to have an internally consistent set of values. But in ENFP, remember there's the EP there. There's the, even if they're not a 7, there's 7-ish in ENFP. And you're going to see a contradiction sometimes between these principles, which means I have to do this principle thing that's not as interesting as doing this EP thing. And so sometimes they can clash and be a difference between what they practice and what they preach. Whereas INFP is more likely to be morally consistent. So, and again, with the younger ones, so because certain principles are hard to live by and not much fun, so you might have an ENFP that's against big corporations, but also have an iPhone because it's like, hey, they don't want to lose out on it. So, and maybe the TI break will come through in terms of inconsistencies in various positions, but I think that's more because they don't want to go there. Okay, that's okay. You know, super chat's welcome. Head in the clouds. Surely being in a relationship can develop FI or having children. Yes, I think it can. Personal development. Meditation. Yes. Notice Tamara on your channel, yeah. I was pretty sure she was ENFJ before I heard about her upbringing. Yes. Yes, and when I initially saw her, again, you have drive-by typings with someone's energy. Because she was on camera, on her channel, initial energy, I thought ENFP. But that's just her having energy for the camera in an FE moment. I will close with, unless I get more questions. 6 people viewing. Typology questions. For me, NIF has the biggest contrast between the most internal function of them all, NI, and the most other-based function of them all, FE. So if we say, is SE other-based? Yeah, but it doesn't happen it doesn't happen in that pairing because it has to be NI with an extroverted judging function. So I would still say with TE, you're still going to get, say with NIT, and then they've got the strong TI as well. So it's like they're still going to think about it. But whilst NIF, INFJ is with somebody, it depends how much they're in FI mode or FE mode, but they can get, it's like poles apart when in FE mode versus when they're in NI mode. If they're on their own, they're not really using FE. Not unless they're thinking about that aspect of FE to do with mores. So yeah, we have to be careful. Right then, so I'm going to close down unless I receive another question from someone not called Head in the Clouds. I'm going to... What else is this to say? Yes, I am working on a functions book. Might take a year or two. I'm going to do it in a proper sort of analysis of the functions. I'm not going to sort of making the case of, oh, these are functions and these are great. It's like the pros and cons of functions and how to look at them properly. How do you develop SE break and how do you work around it as an INTP? The problem is not wanting to. Which aspects of SE are they? Well, I suppose from a power point of view, I used to do Taekwondo, only up to yellow belt, so I'm not going to pretend to be more than what I am. But I got injured. But say an INTP could go on and do lots of, say, in martial arts, and they would like maybe feel more confident. There would be more in their bodies. So those aspects of extroverted sensing in terms of being in the moment, and then also certain physical things, bits about feeling calm under pressure. Maybe if the INTP has been through enough experiences, they can learn from their experience and sort of like learn, like, not as green in those particular situations. So it's maybe a thing of sort of learning from experience, but it's still going to feel under pressure and react to it. In terms of the adaptability aspect of extroverted sensing, yes, that can be improved with experience. It's more a case of having to make quick decisions under pressure when the thought process of INTP is to reason things through, all the deduction, and how things can go wrong. So I once talked about Wojtek about this, like say if someone's thinking about a violent confrontation, INTP is thinking about how things can go wrong in terms of, well, if I have this fight with this person, and this other INTP resembler, somebody else mentioned this, oh, they could get brain damage because of the fight. I mean, themselves. So it's like they might think, if they win the fight, if they lose the fight, that's one thing. If they win the fight, well, they could get in trouble with the law. Or that person might not say, oh, you have bested me, you're the better person. It's like they might then come back and get revenge on you, and things might then escalate. So INTP will like see all of the consequences of these actions and think, oh, it's best to just avoid that situation. Whereas the aspect of extroverted sensing, which is hardest for me to do, is acting on impulse without thinking about it. And it's like, unless it's coming from a place of FI in a comfort zone, then I can. So it's like, it just sounds as if it's unthinking. And so that's why I scored like 1 out of 16 on Dario's inventory of extroverted sensing. Right then. So that's the conclusion. I've got 6 viewers, and one of them is posting and the other 5 are taciturn. Right. Or maybe on mobile devices and they're not got the easy facility to type away. Right, so I'm going to end now. Bye-bye.